Very few topics in cycling inspire as much controversy as helmets. Some people insist they're essential, calling non-wearers reckless and evoking harsh and violent imagery. Enjoy your traumatic brain injury. You'll regret it when you're in a hospital with a feeding tube. You hear suggestions of denying access to public health care. On the opposite end, helmet skeptics argue that they're a distraction. I've actually heard people call them magic hats that don't offer significant protection, if any at all. Helmets dehumanize cyclists and send the wrong message. They're dorky and uncool rather than fashionable and European. So what's the truth about helmets? That depends on the question. Whether they provide protection is different from whether you're reckless to not wear one, which is different from whether helmets should be mandatory. Let's start with a simple one. If you fall or crash, do helmets protect you? Yes. Helmets reduce the chance of serious injury and death, according to a 2018 review of 55 studies. Those looked at crash data from hospitals and police, finding that cyclists wearing helmets suffered far fewer injuries to the head and brain, with no difference for upper spine injuries. However, helmets seem to provide the most protection to individual falls. Think obstacles, bumps, or slippery surfaces. Helmets still help if you get hit by a car, but probably not as much. The force is much higher, you have the chance of being run over, and non-head injuries become more serious. Do helmets increase crash risk? The concept of risk compensation suggests that people may act more dangerously with safety features, like driving closer to the car in front of you if you know you have anti-lock brakes. Helmets might lead you to ride more dangerously or cause drivers to act more dangerously around you, but evidence on this is mixed. A UK study suggests drivers give less space to helmeted cyclists, and Norwegian studies found regular helmet users ride more slowly without one. However, non-helmet wearers don't seem to speed up when given helmets, and a German study found no link between helmets and speed. A review of 23 studies found that most don't support helmets causing risk-taking, with some even associating helmets with safer riding, though causation in some of the studies is unclear. There's still room for more research, but so far it hasn't been clearly established that helmets lead to riskier behavior overall, and even some of the findings supporting it have been small. One of the Norwegian studies found that taking away a cyclist's helmet slowed them down by 1.5 kilometers or 1 mile per hour. Does that slightly safer speed make up for the loss of head protection? So helmets provide protection. Is it crazy or reckless to not wear one? That depends not just on the protection, but also the level of risk. What if I told you that wearing a helmet while walking or jogging would protect your head in case of a fall? That's probably true, but no one wears a helmet while doing those things because they judge the risk to be low enough. But people are a lot more likely to wear helmets for things like ice skating or American football, because falling or getting hit is much more common. A recent study on England and Wales found that cycling is somewhere in the middle of the risk scale. With around 3 major trauma events per 100,000 participants, it's much more dangerous than walking and a few times more dangerous than jogging. But it's only 1/10 as dangerous as ice skating or skateboarding. That's major trauma events, so it's not just head injuries, but it's more than just scrapes and bruises. But the study couldn't distinguish between different types of cycling, lumping together activities like racing, mountain biking, commuting, and leisure rides, despite very different speeds and obstacles. There's good evidence that different types of cycling have different risk levels. First, gender. In this study, cycling was much safer for women than for men. Still more dangerous than walking, but about the same level as jogging, possibly due to choosing safer types of cycling or safer environments. An older study from Finland found that sports cycling caused 4 times more injuries than commuting. And a study of racing cyclists found that injuries were 5 times higher on race day than in practice, which is easily avoided by not racing. The type of bike probably matters. Bent-over bikes with drop bars promote faster speeds, worse visibility, and a more vulnerable head position than more upright bikes. I couldn't find direct studies on that, but research links aerodynamic riding styles to other issues like lower back pain. Step-through bikes definitely feel safer in slippery weather too, because you can easily dismount instead of falling. So the data isn't as detailed as we'd like, but it's reasonable to say that safer types of cycling can be about as safe as jogging. This isn't hypothetical. In the UK study, cycling was literally about as dangerous as jogging for women. Men were a different story. Unless you're one of the approximately 0 people who insists on jogging with a helmet, it's hard to call it reckless to not wear a helmet for safer types of cycling. Should helmets be mandatory? They still provide protection for everyone, and some types of cycling are legitimately much more dangerous. Many would argue that it's just simpler and safer to create a social and legal expectation that everyone wears a helmet while on a bike. It's like seatbelts in cars. You don't decide based on the route, speed, or type of car you'll be riding in. You just wear a seatbelt because it's the law. The biggest concern with helmet laws is that they might discourage cycling. Physical activity is really, really good for you.
It's well known that regular exercise is good for your health, but a new scientific consortium is revealing fresh insights into just how profound the benefits are for the human body.
And the health benefits of cycling pretty consistently outweigh the risks from crashes and pollution. Your choice to bike benefits other people too, less pollution and traffic danger for them. Evidence that helmet laws discourage cycling is surprisingly mixed though. Australian research found a short-term dip in cycling after helmet laws, but no clear long-term reduction. A Canadian study found no effect, and a review of studies suggested that helmet laws might just not matter as much to people's decisions as bike infrastructure does. Helmet laws, however, have been linked to struggling bike share systems, especially in Australia. Melbourne bike share shut down in 2019 despite attempting helmet vending machines. Seattle's helmet law seems to have played a role in its system's 2017 closure. Vancouver's bike share, hampered by mandatory helmets, lags behind other big Canadian cities in ridership. The one exception I can think of is Quebec City, which has strong growth in bike share ridership despite helmet rules, maybe due to its unique, fully electric fleet. Quebec mandates helmets only for e-bikes. Living in Montreal, where bike share has become central to cycling culture, letting people take unplanned trips, connect with transit, and avoid theft, helmet mandates feel very hard to support. But the evidence that they discourage cycling isn't as consistent or straightforward as I would have thought. Do helmets dehumanize cyclists? A recent study found that cyclists wearing helmets were perceived as less human than those without. They tested this by making participants view paired images of cyclists in different attire and asking them to choose which seemed less human, and they chose the helmeted cyclist more often. But they had to choose one. They couldn't say, "I see them both as human." As the authors acknowledge, this method is designed to detect subtle perception differences. The study doesn't necessarily prove that people have substantially different feelings towards cyclists with helmets. They also detected a dehumanizing effect for cyclists wearing a baseball cap. What makes it even harder to interpret the results is that most study participants were themselves frequent cyclists. So that's my take on the research so far. Two things are clear. Helmets offer meaningful protection in crashes, and different types of cycling come with very different risk levels. These risks depend on factors like the activity, racing versus commuting, infrastructure, and conditions like slippery roads. Other questions are less settled. The idea that helmets encourage risk-taking isn't well supported overall, but could use more research. While a study linked helmets to cyclist dehumanization, it wasn't clearly a meaningful or large effect relevant for the real world. The biggest wildcard is mandatory helmet laws. Studies from Canada and Australia don't necessarily show a sustained decrease in cycling, but helmet laws do seem to be a major hindrance to the massive growth of bike share. And no city that I'm aware of has achieved Dutch or Danish level cycling numbers with helmet laws. Maybe they don't matter as much in relatively low cycling environments, but do limit widespread adoption of cycling. The research just isn't totally clear on this. Here's our backstory with helmets. When we started getting into cycling for transportation nearly a decade ago, we always wore them because it was just what you do. Over time, living in a fairly bike-friendly city, we started wearing them less, especially with bike share because helmets aren't always on hand. Now we usually wear them for day trips or unfamiliar routes, but not routine trips around the neighborhood. I wanted to make this video because the helmet debate is oddly extreme and polarized, and I have disagreements with both sides. The pro-helmet camp treats them as essential to cycling, ignoring that not all biking is racing down hills with your head pointed at the ground. They rely too much on an always err on the side of safety argument that feels selectively applied. People take on risks in transport all the time without the same aggressive judgmentalism reserved for dastardly helmetless cyclists. Cycling without a helmet is usually healthier than not cycling at all, but non-cyclists face far less criticism for statistically less healthy lifestyles. Our culture overemphasizes helmets beyond their actual importance and uses and engages in victim blaming. Helmets seem to help the most in single bike falls, and responding to a collision with, "Was the cyclist wearing a helmet?" is almost like hearing that someone's house burned down in a wildfire and asking if they had a smoke alarm installed. The anti-helmet side is prone to wishful thinking and overinterpreting research on things like risk compensation or dehumanization. You can find helmets inconvenient and accept the risk, but the idea that they don't help or they're actually better off without one is straining the evidence. But people want to believe, and you get articles like this one or this one shared around. Many European-inspired activists are too quick to echo attitudes they hear from Dutch or Danish people about how wearing a helmet makes you look ridiculous, when we don't have Dutch or Danish-level bike infrastructure. Also, many people start out with helmets before reconsidering them later as they get more comfortable, like we did. And just like, who cares if other people want to wear a helmet? Don't be a snob, let people bike their own way. I'm specifically thinking of a comment we got on a shot of cyclists in Montreal that said, "You're never going to develop a cycling culture like that," referring to some of them wearing helmets. But helmets aren't mandatory, except on e-bikes, or even socially pressured here. Who cares? You build a cycling culture by building bike infrastructure, not by shaming people who voluntarily choose to wear a helmet. Finally, if helmets are most useful in single bike crashes, wearing one shouldn't only depend on infrastructure. You might also voluntarily consider it for snowy or icy conditions, e-bikes with higher speeds, hilly routes with downhill segments, e-scooters with small wheels, riding after drinking, or if you're older and have balance issues. Here in Montreal, you see noticeably more helmets in the winter, and that makes a lot of sense because for a few months each year, the city looks like this. This video is about places like Canada, the UK, and the US where helmet debates are most common, but let's address the Netherlands since it'll come up in the comments. How safe is cycling in Bike Utopia? Cycling there is nearly as safe as walking in terms of traffic deaths per kilometer, but it has higher injury rates. Cyclists account for 1/3 of road deaths, but 2/3 of traffic-related ER visits. Those numbers seem high, but they reflect a country where cycling is extremely common. By all accounts, cycling there is safer than in the Anglosphere. However, it does seem to be riskier than walking, particularly for the growing group of older e-bike riders. There's been some talk about helmets for this demographic, but in a country where helmets are seen as sporty and are very rare for everyday cycling, that's been controversial. Conclusion: helmets are great for protecting your head, especially for racing or mountain biking. For utility and leisure cycling in low-stress environments, the risk is much lower and going without one isn't inherently reckless. The Dutch and Danish prove that. Advocates in North America, the UK, Ireland, and Australia should be able to push back against helmet laws and victim blaming while avoiding anti-helmet snobbery. Not everyone has access to safe infrastructure, and helmets are valuable for e-bikes in slippery conditions. Ultimately, though, helmets should be a secondary focus. The key to widespread cycling is designing cities with cyclists in mind. Thanks for watching through to the end of the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and a special thanks to our supporters on Patreon.